The world holds its breath. Across the globe, in cities and on farms, in the hearts of soldiers and the prayers of mothers, a single, terrifying question hangs in the air. It is a question that will be answered not in a single day, but over 6 years of unimaginable struggle. It is a question of freedom versus tyranny, of light against an advancing darkness. This is the story of the Second World War, a conflict so vast it truly became a world war, a battle that changed everything forever. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but in the scarred psyche of a nation. Germany in the 1930s is a nation humiliated, crippled by the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and devastated by the Great Depression. From this fertile ground of resentment, a virulent new force emerges, promising restoration, pride, and vengeance. His name is Adolf Hitler, and his National Socialist Party speaks to the deepest fears and angers of the German people. He preaches a gospel of racial purity, of Aryan supremacy, and of Lebensraum, living space to be carved from the lands to the east. With mesmerizing oratory and ruthless political cunning, he consolidates power, dismantling democracy from within. The world, weary from one great war and mired in economic crisis, watches with apprehension but takes little action. This policy of appeasement will prove to be a catastrophic failure. The first act of aggression is a test. In 1936, Hitler remilitarizes the Rhineland, a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. France and Britain protest but do nothing. Emboldened, Hitler sets his sights on unification with Austria, the Anschluss, in 1938. Again, the world stands by. Then comes the true crisis, the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with a large ethnic German population. At the Munich Conference in September 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, believing he has secured peace for our time, agrees to hand the territory over to Hitler, sacrificing Czechoslovakian sovereignty without its representation. 6 months later, in a blatant act of betrayal, German troops march into the rest of Czechoslovakia. The illusion of appeasement is shattered. The final trigger is Poland. Hitler, flush with success, demands the return of the free city of Danzig and a corridor through Polish territory. This time, Britain and France draw a line in the sand, guaranteeing Polish independence. A pact is signed, a devil's bargain between two ideological enemies, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Secretly, it carves up Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. With his eastern flank secure, Hitler gives the order. On September 1st, 1939, the German Blitzkrieg, lightning war, unleashes its fury on Poland. Dive bombers scream from the skies, panzer divisions punch through lines, and infantry moves with stunning speed. The world is stunned by the ferocity and efficiency of this new warfare. On September 3rd, honoring their pledge, Britain and France declare war on Germany. The Second World War has begun. While Poland fights a desperate two-front war against both Germany and the invading Soviets from the east, a strange quiet falls over the Western Front. Journalists call it the phony war. For 8 months, aside from naval engagements, little happens. This illusion is shattered in the spring of 1940. In April, Germany invades Denmark and Norway. In May, the main blow falls on France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Instead of repeating the old Schlieffen Plan, the German attack, Plan Yellow, is a masterstroke of deception and audacity. While feinting with the force into Belgium, the main German armored thrust, led by generals like Erwin Rommel, punches through the impenetrable Ardennes forest, outflanking the massive French Maginot Line and the bulk of the Allied armies. The Allied front collapses into chaos. The British Expeditionary Force, along with thousands of French and Belgian soldiers, is driven back to a small port on the French coast, Dunkirk. What happens next becomes a legend. In Operation Dynamo, a flotilla of over 800 naval and civilian vessels, fishing boats, pleasure yachts, lifeboats, crosses the English Channel under relentless Luftwaffe attack. In a miracle of deliverance, over 338,000 Allied soldiers are evacuated from the jaws of capture and certain destruction. It is a military defeat, but a colossal psychological victory. Without that army, Britain would have been left defenseless. France, however, could not be saved. German troops march into a nearly deserted Paris on June 14th. An armistice is signed in the very same railway carriage where the Germans surrendered in 1918. In a matter of weeks, the proud French army, considered the finest in Europe, has been utterly defeated. A collaborationist regime is established in the town of Vichy, while from London, a lone defiant voice crackles over the radio waves. It is a new British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. "We shall fight on the beaches," he vows, his voice resonating with grim determination. "We shall never surrender." Britain now stands alone. Hitler expects them to sue for peace. He is met with defiance. The Battle of Britain is not fought on land, but in the skies over southern England. The German Luftwaffe, under Hermann Goering, seeks to achieve air superiority as a prelude to invasion, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. What follows is a relentless aerial duel between the German Messerschmitt Bf-109s and the British Hawker Hurricanes and Supermarine Spitfires, flown by the young, brave pilots of the Royal Air Force. This is their finest hour. The pilots, the famous few to whom so many owed so much, were a multinational force, including Poles, Czechs, and Canadians, who fought with a particular fury. The British advantage lay not just in the superb Spitfire, but in a secret weapon: radar. This technology allowed RAF Fighter Command to efficiently vector their limited numbers of planes to intercept incoming German raids, never wasting a precious aircraft. As the battle rages, the Luftwaffe shifts its strategy, mistakenly believing it can break British morale by bombing cities. The Blitz on London, Coventry, and other urban centers begins, a terrifying nightly ordeal of death and destruction from the air. But this shift gives the RAF crucial breathing room to recover. By September, the threat of invasion has passed. For the first time, Hitler has been denied his objective. The battle is won, but the war is far from over. Even as the Battle of Britain raged, a new, even more expansive theater of war was opening in the Mediterranean and North Africa. Mussolini's Italy, eager for its share of glory, had invaded Greece and was making pushes in Africa. These ambitions quickly turned to debacles, requiring German reinforcement. In North Africa, the legendary Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel, and his Afrika Korps arrived to support the Italians, engaging in a dramatic seesaw tank war with the British Eighth Army across the vast, unforgiving desert. But Hitler's gaze was turning east to his ultimate ideological enemy, the Soviet Union. On June 22, 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in human history. Over 3 million Axis troops stormed across an 1,800-mile front, catching Stalin and the Red Army completely by surprise. The early weeks were a disaster for the Soviets. Entire armies were encircled in massive pockets at Minsk and Kyiv, resulting in millions of prisoners. The German advance seemed unstoppable, driving deep towards Leningrad, Moscow, and the oil fields of the Caucasus. But the vastness of Russia, the brutal arrival of General Winter, and the astonishing resilience of the Soviet soldier began to take their toll. The German advance stalled in the frozen suburbs of Moscow in December 1941. For the first time, the Wehrmacht was forced into a major retreat. The Eastern Front would become the most savage and bloody theater of the entire war, a conflict of annihilation where the rules of engagement were discarded and millions would perish. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, a parallel conflict was brewing. An expansionist Japan, seeking resources for its empire and engaged in a brutal war in China, found itself increasingly constrained by American economic sanctions, particularly an oil embargo. Diplomacy failed. Believing a preemptive strike was necessary to cripple American power in the Pacific, Japan made a fateful decision. On the morning of December 7, 1941, a date which, as President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared, would live in infamy, a massive Japanese carrier-based force launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack was devastating, sinking or damaging nearly the entire U.S. Pacific Fleet battleship force. However, in a stroke of fortune, the American aircraft carriers were at sea and escaped destruction. The following day, the United States declared war on Japan. In response, honoring their tripartite pact with Japan, Germany, and Italy, declared war on the United States. The war was now truly global. The industrial and human might of America was now fully committed to the conflict, a tide that would ultimately overwhelm the Axis powers. In the early months, however, Japan was ascendant. They attacked like a hurricane across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, capturing Guam, Wake Island, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Malaya, and Singapore in a stunning series of victories. The world seemed to be crumbling before the Axis onslaught. The tide of war is a slow, grinding force that turns not with a single event, but through a series of pivotal, bloody struggles. The first chink in the Axis armor appears in the Pacific. In May 1942, at the Battle of the Coral Sea, the U.S. Navy checks a Japanese advance towards Australia in a novel engagement fought entirely by carrier-based aircraft, where the opposing ships never saw each other. A month later comes the true turning point. Thanks to brilliant intelligence work breaking Japanese naval codes, the U.S. Pacific Fleet under Admirals Nimitz and Spruance ambushes a massive Japanese carrier force targeting Midway Island. In what can only be described as a miracle, American dive bombers sink 4 Japanese aircraft carriers in a matter of minutes. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 shatters Japan's offensive naval power and initiative. In the Atlantic, the battle against the German U-boats was a relentless, unseen struggle to keep the lifeline between North America and Britain open. The Battle of the Atlantic was a war of convoys and wolf packs, of sonar pings and depth charges, a fight for survival that will last until the very end of the war in Europe. On the Eastern Front, the turning point was even more colossal and costly. It was fought in the ruins of a city that bore Stalin's name. The Battle of Stalingrad, which raged from August 1942 to February 1943, was the single most brutal urban battle in history. It was a meat grinder where the life expectancy of a soldier was less than 24 hours. The German Sixth Army was drawn in, street by street, room by room, and then encircled by a massive Soviet counteroffensive. Trapped, frozen, and starved, the German army was systematically destroyed. The surrender of Field Marshal Paulus was a catastrophic blow from which the German war machine in the East never recovered. As the Soviets began their long, bloody push west, the Western Allies struck at the underbelly of the Axis. In November 1942, Operation Torch landed American and British forces in North Africa, eventually trapping Rommel's Africa Corps between two armies and forcing their surrender in Tunisia in May 1943. The year 1943 marked the beginning of the end for the Axis. With North Africa secured, the Allies launched Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily in July. The campaign led to the toppling of Mussolini and Italy's surrender in September, though German forces swiftly occupied the country, turning the Italian peninsula into a bloody, grinding battle that would last until the final days of the war. It was here that the world first learned of the Siena Caves massacre, where German troops murdered over 300 civilians. But the main Allied effort was being prepared across the English Channel. The Great Crusade, as Eisenhower called it, was the long-awaited Second Front. D-Day, June 6, 1944, Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Under the overall command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, a vast armada of over 6,000 ships carried nearly 160,000 troops across the Channel to the beaches of Normandy, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The fighting was particularly brutal at Omaha Beach, where American infantry faced a hailstorm of fire from the German 352nd Division entrenched on the bluffs above. Through sheer courage and the leadership of junior officers and NCOs on the beach, they secured a precarious foothold. It was the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. After a difficult struggle to break out of the Normandy hedgerows, the Allied armies raced across France. Paris was liberated on August 25, 1944, to scenes of joyous celebration. Meanwhile in the East, the Soviets launched Operation Bagration, an offensive of staggering scale and success that annihilated the German Army Group Center and pushed the front line to the gates of Warsaw. The noose was tightening around the Third Reich. As the Allied armies advanced from the east and west, they began to uncover the Nazi regime's deepest, darkest secret. A secret so monstrous it defied human comprehension. What they discovered were the concentration camps and the death camps. The industrialized, systematic machinery of the Holocaust. Places whose names would become synonymous with ultimate evil. Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Bergen-Belsen. The Nazis' final solution to the Jewish question was a state-sponsored, meticulously planned campaign of genocide. It targeted Europe's Jewish population, 6 million of whom were murdered in gas chambers, by firing squads, and through starvation and disease. But the Jews were not the only victims. The Nazis also systematically murdered millions of others they deemed unworthy of life. Slavs, Roma and Sinti, disabled individuals, homosexuals, and political dissidents. The total death toll of this state-sponsored murder is estimated at 11 million human beings. The liberating soldiers, hardened by years of combat, were utterly unprepared for the skeletal survivors, the piles of emaciated corpses, the smell of death that hung over everything. The world saw the photographic and film evidence, and it was forced to stare into the heart of darkness. The Holocaust stands as the most horrific crime of the 20th century, a permanent scar on human history, and a solemn warning for all generations to come. By the spring of 1945, the Third Reich was in its death throes. The Western Allies had recovered from the surprise of the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last desperate gamble in the Ardennes, and were crossing the Rhine into the German heartland. The Soviets, having captured Warsaw, Budapest, and Vienna, were massing for their final assault on Berlin. The race was on. Inside his Führer bunker deep beneath the Chancellery Gardens in Berlin, a delusional Hitler directed non-existent armies. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet soldiers just blocks away, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. On May 7th, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. May 8th was proclaimed VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, and spontaneous celebrations erupted across the Western world. But the war in the Pacific raged on, growing more savage with each step closer to the Japanese home islands. The battles for Iwo Jima and Okinawa showed the Allies the ferocious, fanatical resistance they could expect from a Japanese defense of the homeland with massive casualties on both sides. Faced with the prospect of an invasion that could cost millions of lives, the new American president, Harry S. Truman, made an unimaginable decision. He would use a new weapon, one of such terrifying power it could end the war in an instant. On August 6, 1945, a lone American B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb, Little Boy, on the city of Hiroshima. The city was vaporized in a blinding flash of light and heat. Tens of thousands died instantly. When Japan still did not surrender, a second bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki 3 days later. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast, his voice heard by his people for the first time. The Second World War, the deadliest conflict in human history, was finally over. The world that emerged from the ashes in 1945 was utterly transformed. The cost had been staggering, an estimated 70 to 85 million people dead, entire cities leveled, and continents left in economic ruin. The old order of European global dominance was finished. In its place, two new superpowers emerged to dominate the world stage, the United States and the Soviet Union. Their wartime alliance, always one of convenience, shattered almost immediately, giving way to a new, tense, and dangerous standoff, the Cold War. Europe was divided by an Iron Curtain, as Churchill termed it, with the Free West facing a communist East. In an attempt to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again, the United Nations was established in 1945, a new global body dedicated to international cooperation and the maintenance of peace. The Nuremberg and Tokyo war crimes trials established a new principle in international law, that individuals, even heads of state, could be held accountable for crimes against peace, war crimes, and the newly defined crimes against humanity. The world had witnessed the abyss, and it was determined to build guardrails. The war also accelerated technological and social change, from the dawn of the atomic age and jet engines to the push for decolonization and the civil rights movement. The battle that changed the world forever was more than a series of military engagements. It was the crucible in which the modern world was forged. Its lessons about the dangers of unchecked aggression, totalitarianism, and hatred remain as vital and urgent today as they were over 75 years ago. The silence after the guns fell quiet is a silence we must forever listen to, a reminder of the price of peace and the fragility of our civilization.